My son wanted for us to take a vacation together, just like we did when he was younger. So we started looking for places that we both were interested in. And coincidentally, at that time, SpaceX announced that they were planning the second flight of the Starship rocket. And although the date was not set, we decided to go there and see the rocket, and if lucky, maybe to see the launch. We made the best of this trip by flying to Houston first to visit family, but also we went to the Space Center Houston and NASA Johnson to learn more about the current and past mission. I had visited the center a long time ago, but since then NASA has launched several missions, and it was a good time to check the new exhibits. So as soon as we entered the center, we saw models and replicas of several spacecraft, like the lunar lander that hung from the ceiling, just like if it was landing on the moon. Then we saw the full model of a Skylab that had an opening so people could go in and figure out how it was to live there. There were two new exhibits that I found quite interesting. One was the shuttle carrier aircraft, and the other was the Falcon 9 first stage booster B-1035. Both of them were at the front of the center in the garden. The next day, we drove south to Harlingen, Texas, where we stayed for the rest of our trip. This town is north of Brownsville, Texas, but almost at the same distance from Starbase. The following day was the day we had been waiting for, the day to visit Starbase. It was cloudy, but there was no rain. A cloudy day was a good thing because we didn't have to worry about getting sunburned or dehydrated, because there is not a visitor center or a place to shelter in there. In that day, it was pretty windy, so we also didn't have to worry about mosquitoes. The drive to the base took us through a part of Brownsville that brought to my mind the streets of Mexico. However, as we passed the U.S. Border Patrol checkpoint, the landscape started to change. We continued driving down the road where we approached the wetlands of the lower Rio Grande Valley, from where we start seeing several Starship second stages and super heavy boosters standing in different areas of the Starbase Production Site. In that facility, you could see three buildings, the mega, high, and mid base. Two of them are finished, and at the top they have a floor made of glass. The mega bay is still missing only the top floors. One might be also made of glass, and I don't know why it's in there, but I heard later that one of them is going to be a bar, which I believe is still not open. We read some information about driving to Starbase, but not about how to get inside. It was not until we got there that we realized that even if one cannot get into the main facilities, driving around gets you close enough to enjoy the view of the rockets and make this trip worthy. During the first visit, there was not much going on at the Starbase Production Site because it was the weekend. Also, there was not much traffic, so it was easy for us to park next to the shoulder across the street. From this point on that day, we had an obstructed view of the front of the facility and the sign of the Starbase. Several super heavy booster and Starship second stages were also inside the high and mega base. However, you cannot see them well from this point. You have to wait until you go further or you are coming back in the opposite direction. We then drove to the launch facility where we saw two Starship second stages and one super heavy booster. I was slightly disappointed when I saw that only the booster was attached to the launch tower. I wanted to see the full rocket stacked, but the Starship second stage was next to it, so it was still a quite impressive sight. We spent most of the time in this part because you can park across the facility in a sandy patch. We were about 500 feet from the launch pad, and the Starship didn't look as big as we imagined, probably because all the structures around are very big, and then that distorts your perspective. We confirmed this when we came back in a different day when there were a few people working on the lower section of the super heavy booster and appeared very small from where we were. This gave us an idea of the real rocket size. I took many pictures of the area and the launch facility, and my son also took a picture of me so I could provide what's there. We also walked to the Boca Chica beach, which is next to the facility. The water was very choppy because it was pretty windy, and there were only a few people there taking pictures or walking on the beach. So there is not much that we could do there except to enjoy those rockets and dream of the future. We stayed in the area for several days, and also this was a good idea because you never know what to expect with the weather and also closures of the facility. One day, for example, we were chased out by the rain, and in another, we couldn't even pass the outskirts of Brownsville because they closed the facilities due to a test. During a work day, we spent some time watching the activities at the launch facility. Several employees came and went on utility vehicles and bikes. They were ringing bike bells as they were approach the main entrance or other cars and people. There was actually a cherry picking lift in the orbital tank farm that was probably fixing a dent that we could see in the tanks. A sweeper went back and forth removing the sand that had accumulated in the front fence. Everybody seems quite content and friendly to me, and they probably noticing that I was smiling, they even waved when they passed by. At the launch facility, we also saw the Starhopper, which is the Starship's prototype rocket that performed their first successful flight in 2019. The Starbase Production Site was also very active this day. Vehicles of all sizes were going in and out, and the area in front of the fence was full of cars. From this point of view, we also had a good view of the 3 of base, a large white hangar under construction, and some of the finished boosters and Starship standing outside. This was also a good way to see inside of the base the Starships and also the boosters. This was the end of our visit and probably good enough for the first time. Coming to Starbase was indeed a treat, and probably more special because I was there with my son, who shares my excitement for technology and space exploration. We missed the launch, but I'm still looking forward to watch the second flight over the internet, and I will be back for another one to see it in person, and also to try to learn more about the people that are working in Starbase and how they feel to contribute to this important and exciting project. But this was not the end of the story. At the Houston airport, I had the opportunity to meet astronaut Reed Wiseman, who was flying with his daughter on the same plane as us. He had a polo shirt with the Artemis logo, which prompted a conversation about the project and my work with Hubble and the Webb telescope. And to my amazement, when I asked about his work with Artemis, he smiled and said, "I hope to fly on the second Artemis mission." I was really happy to hear that, and it was a brief conversation, but as you can imagine, I was delighted to meet him. And as I told Reed in our conversation, this was a wonderful way for me to close the trip to a Starbase and also to the vacation with my son.